All right, for the rest of the show, all about the law. Judge just delayed the sentencing of Peter Liang till next week. Former NYPD officer, as you may remember, convicted of manslaughter last year for the killing of AKAI GURLEY, that in the stairwell of a Brooklyn housing project. Then, just last week, the Brooklyn DA, Ken Thompson, he recommended no jail time for Liang, house arrest, then probation. Soon after that, Liang's attorneys alleged jury misconduct. They said that one of the jurors originally said none of his relatives had ever been accused of a crime, but now the defense is saying that the guy lied. And he, in fact, had a father who served 7 years in prison for accidentally shooting someone. That's a crime similar to the Liang case. Now, the judge could still decide to throw out the verdict, but if the DA was recommending no jail time, the question is, why is the defense pushing so hard to start all over? Well, let's bring in our legal panel. Jim Koussouras, criminal defense attorney in Manhattan, sitting on the board of directors at the New York City Criminal Bar Association. He also frequently lectures at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens and New York City, and sometimes in jolly old England.
One of the few lawyers in New York City who still tries cases back to back to back to back.
And he's on trial now. Mayo Bartlett, an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLLC, former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit, the Westchester County DA's office, and also a rumored name, although we couldn't drag him into it, so maybe even think about being a DA himself. Smartly, he decided otherwise. Mark Furness.
Smart for that.
Yes, a professor at Brooklyn Law. He's argued before the U.S. Supreme Court, and like myself, an Islander fan with fingers crossed for tonight. Okay. May I start with you? To me, this case has been so confusing in so many ways. We've seen, I think, some more egregious cases where there has been shootings, where unarmed men were killed, where even more recklessness was involved. Nonetheless, Liang, to remind everybody, violated protocol. He took his gun out in the stairwell. AKAI GURLEY did nothing wrong other than open a door in a stairwell in a building he lived in, but yet a shot went off, ricochet, tragedy of errors happened, and AKAI GURLEY died, okay, let alone the actions of Officer Liang in the immediate aftermath left a lot to be desired. All that said, rather than relitigating the case, DA says, I got this. Schneiderman, the Attorney General, I'm going to handle this, and he did. He sought for an indictment, got the indictment, got a conviction here, but then he said, I don't want jail time. I want house arrest and then probation. To further confuse it would be beyond even the jury misconduct. That comes to light, and then the Liang team, they want to basically say, throw it all out. My question is, if you were representing Officer Liang, would you say, don't kick a gift horse here, guy. We're looking at no jail time. You want to take this thing back to trial? We may not like the way this thing turns out. What would you have recommended if you heard the rumors about what went on in that jury room? Would you have tried this case all over again?
Well, number one, even if you contest what happened in the jury room, there's no guarantee you'll win. And all of these things are things that the trier of fact takes into consideration. And in this case, that's a jury, but the judge is the sentencing body, and that judge is going to take that into account. And let's assume that you do win. Sometimes when you win on appeal, you actually lose, because now everything's back on the table. There's no guarantee that you're going to necessarily have the same judge again. You can still turn around and you can face multiple years in prison, and nobody would say that it's unfair or that it's unduly harsh. So chances of getting a stiff prison sentence overturned are remote. I think that he really has to do some soul searching. If I think that the error was something that dealt with facts that I can overcome at a second trial, then maybe I go forward. But here, a recommendation, which is an extraordinary recommendation from a DA, that there should be no jail time, is something you really have to consider.
What would you do? Same thing? Would you say this worked out as well as it could have? Maybe we thought we should have gotten acquittal, but given the conviction and given the recommendation of the DA, let's not fight this anymore.
You got to leave it up to your client. Remember, he was a police officer. He lost that profession. He lost his badge. And it really depends on the facts of trial. Now, there's a motion to set aside the verdict in addition to this. And by the way, Rich, Judge Chun held a hearing today and he upheld the verdict.
Yep.
So he lost the issue on the juror misconduct. But look, you get convicted after a trial and there are appellate issues that are viable, then normally under circumstances like this, the client is going to appeal, try to set it aside. I mean, what's very interesting is if you retry the case on the same facts, why would the DA recommend anything different?
Right.
So, you know, there's
If
that
you
issue as
recommended
well.
something different, it might be presumed or appear to be vindictive, which is an independent constitutional problem in itself. But it's kind of a moot point now, because as Jimmy.
It is.
Jimmy
I
brought
guess
out.
my question was, that level of misconduct, allegedly, well, not allegedly, the juror misrepresented his family history as it relates to conviction. Is that very, very unusual, and is that enough historically to get a case tossed?
Oh, this was by no means, as we discussed the last time, a frivolous motion. In fact, as the facts were developed at the hearing, I think it was more serious than initially reported, because these Facebook posts, there were quite a few of them that they unearthed, and apparently the prosecution also unearthed, or allegedly unearthed, some pro-police Facebook messages as well. But you have to pursue this and see where it leads, and the judge questioned the juror very, very aggressively, and we remarked on this the last time. The juror was flip and confrontational and combative and playing games, and who knows what happens. This juror, if he lied during deliberations, he could be subjected to a contempt or an obstruction
Although,
prosecution.
Richard, here's another consideration. Assume you get another trial. Now you have a full transcript of everything. So your testimony almost has to be the same thing. You now are subjecting yourself potential charges of perjury, and also, even if your testimony differs significantly enough in the eyes of the judge to warrant a change in circumstance, that judge, first of all, the judge has not given you any determination that he's not going to put Mr. Liang in jail. So that judge now is free to do anything they want to. It doesn't matter what D.A. Thompson recommends. But on a second trial, you've now made the system go through a second trial on basically a technicality with respect to this juror misconduct issue. The testimony.
It's not a technicality, man.
Well,
You know that.
no, I'm saying it's a technicality. It's not factual. It has nothing to do with the actual underlying facts of the case. So it's not on the merits of the case per se. It's on whether one juror out of all of the jurors, out of the 12 jurors, was swayed. And unless you can show that that person also impacted the other jurors, it's something that really, you're playing with fire. You could easily get a significant
And also,
time.
you introduce, from my world at least, the politics. If people know this is a second trial and they know how this one had ended, all of a sudden you could have motivated communities and constituencies that are going to become very loud.
Well, they're
And at
pretty
least
loud
the
outside the court
suggested
today.
sentencing absolutely might be a little harsh the second time around. All right, I want to get to our second story also in New York. Supervisor for the town of Ramapo has been arrested. Now, when I say that, you probably think this has to do with a school. Nothing to do with that one this time around. Here is federal prosecutor Preet Bahara, talk about it probably more than anybody in this show, describing the case against Christopher St. Lawrence.
The nature of its complexity is maybe evidenced by the fact that no one has ever brought a case like this before, ever, as far as we know, in the country. The FBI and the Rockland County DA's office to investigate thoroughly and completely and comprehensively, and even still, I should say, the investigation is ongoing, so it's not even done yet.
Now, that sure sounds like Bahara's famous "stay tuned" comment that we have heard in the past here. So St. Lawrence, as you know, or may not know, because this was really broke this morning, accused of lying about town finances, then secretly funding construction of a minor league baseball stadium. By the way, if you've ever been there, pretty nice stadium. That happened after voters rejected.
The ends justify the means.
Now, this all came, though, after the voters rejected the stadium proposal. Prosecutors say that the fraud cost the financially strapped town a whole lot of money, as it had to take on more debt, as well as also hike taxes. A different front for Mr. Bahara this time, Jimmy.
A very different front, and really a very complicated case. You know, and I can't wait to see how it pans out. This is a stadium that was rejected, but then started getting built. How do you do that secretly, you know, without somebody asking, excuse me, how's it getting paid for? So, you know, the crimes that are charged are going to be interesting in terms of how they're proven. It was rejected, and now there were lies about the financing, but didn't he fund it through bonds in order to pay for it?
I haven't read the whole indictment, but the crux of it is that they misrepresented the town's finances in connection with the bond offering, and what was concealed was that the town of Ramapo would very likely have to bail the bonds out and repay them out of its own funds, which would be done by levy on the taxpayers. But the interesting thing about this stuff is what he's been doing in all of these cases, and it's neither right nor wrong, it just is, you can't prosecute voter fraud or election fraud under the traditional mail and wire fraud laws. And the reason for that is there's no loss of money or property, as the Supreme Court has narrowed these laws. So he has to look to other ways to get at election fraud. The fraud is that this referendum was essentially nullified by the behind-the-scenes maneuvering. So instead of charging as a straight election fraud, he charges it as a bond fraud to rid
With
society of the same
bondholders
harm.
as the victims.
That's what it sounds like from the case, but I want to just say one thing. In the AKAI, the Obamacare case, Chief Justice Roberts wrote that the lack of historical precedent for something is often the surest indication of a severe constitutional problem with a prosecution. So when he gets up there and constantly touts, there's never been done anything like this before, you know, don't bite off more than you can chew, because there's always an appellate court.
I will say one thing, Mayo, regardless of whether people think that Bahara is a crusader or he's a show pony. The one thing is he's peeling a scab back, which a lot of people don't see, and that is certainly what we saw with both Silver and Skelos, the depth at which you know, there is the levers of power can certainly use that influence for ill-gotten gains, let's say. In this particular case, and again, this is only at the allegation stage or at the charging stage, there's been no convictions, so I don't want to prematurely do this, but to get a stadium built, right, when the voters don't want it and you misrepresent your finances, and then, by the way, you say, hey, I need more tax money to pay for this, and I don't think it was just because he was a baseball fan, all right? Well, we'll see how this all plays out, but my point is, I think the public is starting to say, maybe we ought to look a little closer. Maybe transparency isn't just a popular buzzword, but it would be a good thing. And I'm off my soapbox, but my point is, regardless of whatever...
was kicked to the curb.
Right, exactly. But regardless of what his motivations were, if the people demand to see more of what's going on, I think that's healthier for all involved.
Well, I think you have to look, and it's a chilling effect. And I wouldn't even say it's a chilling effect. What it is it's a reminder to every other public official that, you know, you could be monitored, and we won't look the other way as we may have done in the past.
Well, let me ask you this. You were in the neighboring county in Westchester and worked in that DA's office for a while. When this happens and the U.S. attorney gets involved, does, in this case, the Rockland DA, you know, does he have an egg in his face, because this happened on his watch theoretically, that I should have looked closer at this?
Well, I think that...
Do you get embarrassed when Big Brother comes into your backyard?
Absolutely. You want to be the lead agency. You want to make sure that the people that are your constituents know that you're doing what you're supposed to do. And again, you look on both parties right now that the political outsiders are doing so well. It's largely because there's a perception of corruption across the board, from your local government all the way up to Washington, D.C.
But I think in this one, the Rockland DA is working hand in glove with Bahara, and they were up there at the press conference today.
And this
well.
happened on multiple, this is 4 years ago where this allegedly happened.
A
So
very,
you had
very long
a former
investigation.
county exec and then a current one, even though no one's assigning any blame to either of them, but nonetheless.
It even sends a message to your local prosecutors.
Well,
because
the
again,
message that's going out is it's just not politics as usual anymore. And I mean, to me,
But you know what I mean, Jimmy? Like the Albany DA, a lot of people said when Skelos and Silver went down, where have you been, you know?
Right.
And in this case, maybe in Rockland, to say, this all happened and you never thought to ask any questions?
But that's my point, Rich. Where has anybody been? Nobody's been anywhere, because this is the way it's been going on forever. That
I think this is more politics as usual, because he himself is targeting other politicians in Wall Street. These are his bugaboos, and it may have salutary effects, but it's definitely for
I got to hit a break
self-promotion
here,
as
but
well.
nonetheless here, I think these are things that people can understand. 2 out of the 3 men in the room, and now a stadium, had that thing get built. All right. When we come back, we'll pivot to a case we've spoken about before with a development. The lawsuit against the company that made the assault rifle used at Sandy Hook, that case moving forward, it could be a game changer as it relates to gun control across the country.